Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the logistics and supply chain industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. Today, we're excited to be joined by Madhav Durbha, Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy at Coupa, and Isa Morales, and she is a consultant with Miebach Consulting. So, welcome, Madhav and Isa. Tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Thanks, Ellen. Should I start?
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks for having us, by the way. I'm Isabel Morales. I'm the global head of our network design practice located in Madrid. 6.5 years with Miebach. Prior to joining Miebach on the client side, and around about a decade doing supply chain design and strategy.
Awesome. That's quite a resume right there. What about you, Madhav? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
First of all, thanks for having me, Ellen, and glad to be here. Uh, I am Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy at Coupa Software. In my role, I work very closely with our customers, with our partners, as well as our product teams to make sure we stay current in terms of our customer challenges, as well as making sure that we have the right products we bring to market as well. I spent 4 years with Coupa Software, two of which included with Lamasoft, which got acquired by Coupa back in 2020. And prior to Lamasoft and Coupa, I spent almost 20 years in other supply chain technology companies like I2 Technologies, JDA Software, and Kinaxis. So that's my background. And I live in Atlanta.
It must be nice and warm there. It is very cold here in Indianapolis.
It's very nice. It's going to be 70s today.
Oh, that sounds
Madrid's
wonderful.
also nice. Sorry, Ellen.
All right, let's do something a little bit just kind of fun for a minute. Did either of you start any fun hobbies during the pandemic shutdowns a couple years ago? We're coming up on potentially having a bad flu season again. I need something to do.
On my side, plenty, but I think at top of the list, probably gardening. I think prior
Gardening.
to COVID, yeah, us as consultants, we traveled a lot and I couldn't keep anything alive. But now with more remote work, I can do that. So I think I would say gardening's at the top of my list.
What did you grow? Or that's
Oh,
something you would do?
I have all kinds of stuff. I have grown from tomatoes to potatoes, anything you can think of.
What about you, Madhav? Did you develop any new hobbies or try something new with your extra time?
Oh, I totally did. I started long distance bicycling. So
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
on Saturdays, normally my friends will find me on the trail riding anywhere from 40 to 60 miles. And I recently also completed a 200-mile ride over a weekend. So it's a lot of fun.
Oh my goodness, that's ambitious. And
I
and
try.
and really healthy. I mean, what a great hobby. I learned how to make sourdough bread and use a sourdough starter. So I just gained 20 pounds of bread. We ate so much bread. It was so good. But yeah, that was rather counterproductive for someone sitting at home for a long period of time. So between Isa and I, we'll have to have a dinner and get together and share our food. She'll bring vegetables. I'll bring bread. Madhav, if it's a long distance trip, but you could be here by
you can
tomorrow
come by
if
bike.
you try.
I can try.
All right. Well, let's get to our topic today. And so we are going to talk a little bit about how companies are responding to risk when it comes to their strategy and network design projects. So, what are we seeing in supply chain right now? What is the current state? Because it changes so quickly.
You want me to go first? I can.
Yeah, please do.
All right. So, if one thing that we have seen over the last couple of years, Ellen, is that single points of failure within our supply chains are exposed. So, whether it is dependencies on a single source where bulk of your revenues are dependent upon, or customer commitments are dependent upon, or geo concentration of whether it is resources, manufacturing capacity, sources of supply, etc., is all exposed. The other side of the coin is that the demand side. So we all saw how consumption patterns have changed. If you look at early days of the pandemic, suddenly the tops started selling faster than bottoms. Why? We're all sitting here on Zoom calls and want to dress up nice on top, right? So patterns like that were quite interesting and something that companies were not experiencing before. So a few changes that I have seen organizations implement. It was amazing how quickly companies were able to accelerate their digital journeys and digital transformation. So that's one good thing that came out of it. And also newer ways of working, like Isabel was talking earlier, right? As a consultant, she used to travel a lot and now she gets a lot of stuff done from home, right? So all of us working remotely and being able to come together still as teams and troubleshoot and fix problems and keep the world running and keep the supply chains running. That's something that is commendable. So that's what I saw in the last couple of years.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I would like to pick on the digital aspect. I think we have definitely seen that the digital agenda has come at the top of their priority for organizations. I think in the past, some of the supply chain teams had difficulties in creating a business case because oftentimes generating those returns was quite difficult to capture um, to uh, to make a financial business case. But I think the pandemic actually helped in showing the organization what's the impact of not having those digital initiatives or those platforms, tools, and data infrastructure in place. So that's definitely something that we have seen. Also, the demand for such projects, of course, we always feeling in the consulting side, but that's definitely at the priority of companies' agendas. And I think we see a great example, or we have seen it in the past weeks. I was reading a Wall Street Journal article the other day on how Macy's has addressed the inventory issues. And it was quite interesting. It mentioned about how they started analyzing their credit card information data. They have their own credit card, and then they started analyzing the consumer behavior. And then based on that data, they were able to make decisions to adapt inventory, to cancel orders, and so on. So I think that's a really good example on how that digitalization, the usage of the data that's already being created every minute, every second in our systems, and how having a holistic view as opposed to siloed, it set that company for success. So I think that's a really great example of how companies have achieved that thanks to digitalization and investment in that regard.
If I may add one more point to what Isabel was talking about, the other change, especially when it came to getting digital transformation efforts approved through the finance organization, the awareness for supply chain and the importance of supply chain got elevated, right, in the last couple of years. Now I don't need to explain to anybody what I do for a living. When I say supply chain, people give me these sorry looks when I'm traveling and stuff like that. but uh, but the reality is that the finance organizations uh, started looking at supply chain as more of a strategic differentiator as opposed to just a cost center. And that has made the leader's ability to push the supply chain agenda further within the C suite as well as the boardroom as well. So that has been a very welcoming change as well.
Right, that was always the roadblock when we were trying to, promote digital services or, different ways of solving problems, and it looked like an expense to them. And now they see it for what it is, as an enabler and not so much just this, expensive piece of software or this expensive project that we need to do to make things easier. They're willing to sit and listen and invest in those areas where the supply chain can be a cost driver. rather than just a money dump.
Yeah, like there is a top line play as well, right? Because you're making sure that the business continuity is assured and the product is available when the consumer or customer needs it. So there is a revenue realization aspect to it in making sure that the products get to the right destination. So that realization definitely has set in.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think also that organizations have come to the realization that supply chain design, optimization, planning, and analytics needs to happen at a faster speed than what it used to happen maybe prior to 2020. So the planning cycles need to be shorter, they need to be closely aligned, and they need to be holistic. And the only way to enable that speed is through technology at the end of the day, because otherwise it will take you forever to do it and then you lose the speed.
Most definitely. I know it's part of it's the consumer journey and how people are ordering things, ordering them online. They're expecting things delivered within 2 days. Amazon has kind of taken over everything, and other companies are having to keep up with that Amazon model of delivering something quickly and having an easy returns process. And that means that all of that data, all of that information has to be available so that they can pivot if they need to.
I just wanted to just build on what you just said, and that currently the inventory landscape, I think, is probably one of the most complicated because we are seeing a massive variance from both ends. So you have from the inbound portion or from the sourcing portion, all of these delays in product coming from Asia, so that you have that great variance. And then you also have variance or uncertainty on the customer side. I think we're facing a holiday season now with Thanksgiving coming, Black Friday, and Christmas, and so on, that is being really uncertain. So consumers are also shifting buy-in patterns, and then historical data, it's not so relevant anymore. So we also need to adapt and change the way that we plan for inventory, that it's not so reliant on historical data because we're not behaving the way we usually behave. Um, and then again, we need to have shorter planning cycles. And for that, you need also a solid tool that helps you do that.
Yeah, from my perspective, I agree with everything, Isabel, that you're talking about. The one thing that I had seen was because of the lead time variability that Isabel was talking about, Ellen, in the last couple of years, organizations started shifting towards these just in case inventory models. So, building up these inventory buffers so that just in case I don't get that supply on time, I want to make sure that I'm protected. However, a couple of things that happened, if you look back into last year, what happened is that uh, because of the China's zero COVID policy and some of the transportation ocean carrier constraints that we had experienced, what happened was some of the seasonal merchandise that was supposed to arrive on time ended up arriving late. So that swung the pendulum to the other extreme, where suddenly organizations are finding themselves with too much inventory in certain spots and too little inventory in certain spots. So overall, the levels of inventory have gone up. However, there is a significant imbalance in terms of having a feast or famine situation, for lack of better words, that we are seeing. The other aspect to this, as well as the flow paths to the market, also radically shifted over the last couple of years, whether it is because of port congestions, transportation capacity shortages. Now, if you look at Mississippi River is drying up right now, the water levels are significantly lower. So the transportation through River in general is getting pretty challenging if you're following the news. So because of issues like that, given that the flow paths, the mode of transportation itself is starting to change, organizations can no longer can look at inventory and inventory optimization as efforts in isolation from supply chain design. You need to look at this holistically. If my flow paths are shifting, for example, I'm instead of receiving the products from the port of Savannah, now I'm starting to receive the products at the port of Mobile, Alabama. What that means is now my shipping from location has changed. So Accordingly, my inventory levels and the form and function of inventory needs to flex as well. So I just wanted to call that nuance out also. So kind of inventory optimization efforts need to be looked at in tandem with the flow paths to market and how the supply chain design itself is evolving.
Point, Madhav, that inventory optimization actually goes hand in hand with that flow path optimization, and also actually with network design as well. So if you think about uh, what are the drivers, or at least some of the drivers, one of the drivers of the inventory issues that especially retailers are experimenting, it's because of this sourcing from Asia, right? With really long lead times, very little flexibility in terms of canceling an order or changing an order. They are really, really long times. Because of that lack of flexibility, companies are forced to buy in advance of the season, to buy in massive quantities for the whole season, and then in the end, that ends up adding inventory and also adding risk for situations like the ones that we're seeing at the moment. So when you think about inventory optimization from a network design perspective, and if we blend in near shoring, it's not only about saving transportation costs, it's about also saving inventory and protecting yourself against these variances that we're seeing at the moment. Yeah. So probably if you have a supplier that's closer, then not only you have a shorter lead time, but you also have probably more flexibility. So if you detect a demand signal that tells you that you should buy less, then probably you have a greater chance of canceling that order. So I just wanted to build on that point, because indeed inventory optimization goes hand in hand with flow path optimization and network optimization. So that's why I also think that you need not only one tool that addresses a specific issue, but you also need this overarching tools that give you a holistic view.
That's actually you triggered an interesting topic right there about reshoring or onshoring, or even I hear about the term friendshoring, right? So
Mhm.
when you look at these kind of trends, especially besides the lead time compression when it comes to nearshoring, one of the things that we see is also the environmental sustainability aspects of it. Because when you reduce the amount of distances that goods need to travel, there is a carbon footprint benefit that can be associated with that besides the speed to market. However, when you're talking about nearshoring or reshoring, it also has got a cost implication. Whether it is capex investments, whether it is uh, labor costs that could potentially go up, even if I can offset some of that with transportation costs, right? So all that again has got significant implications in terms of supply chain design. And what we are seeing is organizations increasingly doing this trade off analysis, saying what is the tipping point? When does it make sense to nearshore or onshore? And in tandem with that, what is the carbon footprint savings associated with that? In fact, one of the high tech companies that we work with, they're going through exactly these type of scenarios right now around their supply chain design.
Yeah, that's a really great point on ESG emissions, and something that we are incorporating in network studies is actually the footprint associated to being in a specific country, for example. So when we look at network design, let's speak about the case of Europe. Let's say you are looking into an alternative to of moving a distribution center to Poland versus moving it to Czech Republic or Eastern Germany. So labor cost wise, probably the most affordable is going to Poland. But when you look at it from an ESG perspective, having a DC in Poland has a significantly higher footprint, because Poland sources energy, or a lot of energy, out of coal, which has a higher emissions. So, and I fully agree with that. And CO2 emissions, not only from transportation mode, but also from energy sourcing, are being now considered in network design.
So that's quite a shift in the different things that a network design is going to consider when we're including not only, nearshoring and what was it, friendshoring?
Friendshoring, yes.
But to consider all of those, the emissions and the sustainability as part of it, that's not something that has typically been a huge focus, at least here in the US. I know Europe is a little bit ahead of the US in terms of some of those environmental policies. But Isa, are you seeing those trends globally, that's becoming more of a factor when people are looking to make changes or adaptations to their network?
Most definitely. Yes. We see this in, I think, every global study that we're doing at the moment. So, not only in regional studies at a European level, but also global studies. And now there's definitely a push for switching to ocean mode, all those lanes that were still served by air mode. So, I think I think before, probably the key KPIs were cost, yeah, operational cost, inventory cost, but now risk and emissions are part of the basics of any network study that we're doing.
Yeah, maybe I can comment on specifically on the US perspective too. Ellen, is a couple of things, right? From a regulatory standpoint, one is if you see the Inflation Reduction Act that recently that White House has signed, there are provisions around environmental justice within that. So organizations need to be cognizant of the energy intensity, right, of their operations, and what communities are disproportionately getting impacted from those from the energy intense activities as well. So that is one example. The other example is the Securities and Exchanges Commission is also looking to tighten regulation around um, all these publicly traded companies. They're putting out these targets around their net zero emissions and so on and so forth, but holding companies accountable and making sure that any such claims from emissions reduction are stand to the test of audit as well, and with implications of significant penalties in case of companies misrepresenting their emission progress, right? Emission reduction progress. That is another thing that we are seeing as well. So as the regulation is tightening, it's. I agree with Isabel that this is becoming more of a global phenomenon at this point in time. That's correct. You want me to take that on? I can. I can get started. I'll
Yes,
bring it
please.
back. I'll bring it back to where we started this conversation, what I said in the beginning, which is the supply chain agenda is shifting from being a mere cost center to something that is a strategic enabler for the business. So the chief supply chain officer now has a seat at the table, and the onus is upon us to deliver on that promise to make sure that supply chain continues to serve as a differentiating function, not just as a cost center. So that's going to be top of mind for a lot of the chief supply chain officers. Now, couple of headwinds that I see coming our way. On the flip side, there is some relaxation in terms of the ocean capacity constraints that we were experiencing. In fact, the ocean container costs are showing a downward trend right now, so which should give some relief. On the flip side, the labor shortages, the talent shortages. I was recently at a forum with a number of chief supply chain officers, and top of mind for them is the people aspect of it, right? How do you make sure that they have the right retention mechanisms in place and talent attraction mechanisms in place as well? So so that is people aspect is one thing, and then the topic of sustainability. International Maritime Organization is going to tighten the regulation around the emissions around the ocean vessels come 2023 and start grading vessels into A, B, C, D, E based on the emissions. And accordingly, what ocean carriers may implement is something called slow steaming, which is slowing down the vessels so that they reduce the emissions. What that translates to is increased lead time. So the trend of disruptions is going to continue. I'm just giving a couple of examples of that, right? So how do you balance these and still push that supply chain agenda to make sure that it becomes a strategic differentiator and stays that way? That's going to be the big challenge and the opportunity for the supply chain leaders.
I fully agree with what you just said. If I had to prioritize or summarize only 2 points for the supply chain leadership, is to not lose momentum and prioritize the digital agenda and the organizational agenda. Because you can implement a supply chain data lake, you can implement a supply chain design tool or a holistic supply chain planning tool. But if you don't have the processes in place and the people to drive value out of them, then the piece of the puzzle is incomplete. And if you think about the the maturity stages from Gartner in supply chain planning, I think you have people, technology, KPIs, and processes. And if I had to prioritize two of those would be technology and people. Yeah, from my perspective.
Fantastic. Yeah, I
Absolutely.
agree. So I know we're going to get into the people portion of that on another episode with Andrew from Coupa. So I look forward to Isa joining us again for that discussion. But that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much, Madhav and Isa, for joining us today. I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation. If our listeners enjoyed, please rate our podcast. 5 stars would be lovely. And as always, thank you for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain.